On First at 9 this Wednesday, the 9th of April 2025. D-Day. President Anura Dissanayake convenes an all-party conference as US tariffs take effect. Trump imposes 104% tariffs on China. China retaliates by raising tariffs against the US to 84%. Undaunted. US tariffs won't negatively impact Sri Lanka tourism. Deputy Minister assures.
There will be an impact over the disposable income of individuals, followed by these tariff imposements. But in the top market categories, that still would be fine for their travel decisions.
Looking ahead, Sri Lanka's inflation will rise to 3.1% in 2025, says the ADB.
Despite these achievements, the recovery remains fragile.
Combating corruption. Sri Lanka launches national anti-corruption plan for the next 5 years. President vows to eliminate institutional frameworks centered around bribery and corruption.
Chilo Dairy, Sri Lanka Kiren Perata. ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
කට්ට පරිස්සම් කරගත්තොත් අපි පරිස්සම්.
From Derana, this is Derana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9, brought to you by the nation's most trusted news source, Derana. I'm Tariff Mahendra, joining you live with the latest in Sri Lanka and around the world. In your top story this evening, the new tax policy introduced by US President Donald Trump, affecting nearly 100 countries, including Sri Lanka, will take effect today. In response, China announced today that it will increase additional tariffs on US goods by 84%. This move follows the US administration's decision yesterday to raise the maximum tariff on Chinese imports to 104%. Meanwhile, Minister Bimal Ratnayake in an official statement noted that President Anura Dissanayake has convened an all-party meeting tomorrow to discuss the implications of the US tariffs. As announced by US President Donald Trump last week, the new reciprocal tariffs imposed on countries that trade with the US came into effect today. Among the countries most affected is Sri Lanka, which is facing a 44% tariff on all goods exported to the US. Meanwhile, the trade war between the US and China intensified as China retaliated by imposing tariffs on US goods in response to the reciprocal tariffs. President Trump, who had warned of an additional 50% tariff to be imposed on China if they did not withdraw the 34% tariff on US goods before noon today, went ahead with his decision, resulting in a staggering 104% tariff on Chinese goods exported to the US.
It was a mistake for China to retaliate. The Chinese want to make a deal, they just don't know how to do it, but the president will be implementing these 104% tariffs on China.
Right now, China is paying a 104% tariff. Now, it sounds ridiculous, but they charged us for many items 100%, 125%. Many countries have. They've ripped us off left and right. They want to make a deal. They really do. They want to make a deal. They just don't know how to get it started.
Meanwhile, China pushed back further on US President Trump's tariff policies by increasing its levies on US imports from 34 to 84% with effect from tomorrow. China, responding to the tariff, said that if the US insists on waging a tariff war, it will definitely retaliate.
The US side is still imposing extreme pressure on China by imposing tariffs indiscriminately. China firmly opposes and will never accept such arrogant and bullying behavior. If the US really wants to solve the problem through dialogue and negotiations, it should show an attitude of equality, respect, and reciprocity. If the US disregards the interests of both countries and the international community and insists on waging a tariff war and trade war, China will definitely retaliate.
The Trump administration's tariff imposed on both adversaries and allies alike have shocked primary, secondary and oil markets around the world. Some analysts have described this as the worst market crash since the 1929 Wall Street crash and the ensuing Great Depression of the 1930s. Markets, which showed positive signs yesterday after falling for 3 consecutive days again, plunged following the imposition of the 104% tariff on China. President Trump, during a Republican Party gathering, stated that countries are lining up to make agreements with the US. He also mentioned plans to impose a new tariff on pharmaceutical corporations in the future.
I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything. I'll do anything, sir. We're going to tariff our pharmaceuticals. And once we do that, they're going to come rushing back into our country because we're the big market. So we're going to be announcing very shortly a major tariff on pharmaceuticals.
Officials from the Asian Development Bank who held a press briefing in Colombo today also commented on the potential impact of the tariffs on Sri Lanka, which will take effect from today.
The US has exempted some products from the tariffs, and the blue bars on this chart show the effective tariff when adjusting for those exemptions. However, you can see clearly for Sri Lanka that this exempted part is really tiny, close to 0.1 of the overall tariff.
Any change in the existing tariff will erode our cost competitiveness on the exports, specifically given that Sri Lanka's apparel sector looks at a very niche market into the US. And this is coming after a time where we're coming out of a very deep crisis. What we would expect is further order cancellations from Sri Lanka due to the higher landing costs. We would expect a slowdown in export-oriented manufacturing sector driven by the lower production, and we would expect worsening investor confidence, and this would lead to potential lower foreign direct investments and lower capital expansions for the domestic factories that are currently operating in Sri Lanka. On the government's fiscal side of things, we do expect lower revenue, and there would be a need for higher social spending.
Meanwhile, a tense situation arose between employees and the management of a garment factory in the Udukave area of Waligama Matara after the management announced that the New Year bonus could not be granted this year due to the tariffs imposed by the United States. Given the situation, President Anura Dissanayake has decided to convene an all-party meeting at the Presidential Secretariat tomorrow to discuss the US tariffs. In a post on X, Minister of Transport, Highways, Ports and Civil Aviation Bimal Ratnayake stated that the decision was made following a request from 12 opposition party leaders to the President.
Union Assurance.
චන්දුරුසුමේ කාගෙන් බලා අපේ සිංග TV සඳහා සුපිරි ඩීල්.
Now, Deputy Minister of Tourism Professor Ruwan Ranasinghe says government does not anticipate the newly imposed US reciprocal tariffs to have a prolonged negative effect on Sri Lanka's tourism sector. Speaking at a government media conference today, the Deputy Minister said Sri Lanka is focusing on attracting upmarket tourists to the island whose spending power will not be greatly affected by the tariffs.
With your target to increase the tourism arrivals, how much of investments have you all received so far?
There is a clear increase in terms of the investment to the sector. For 2024, we have received nearly 40 million USD. If you take last 3 months, we have secured nearly 25 million so far.
So you said that in the short term, you don't expect any impact from the US tariffs on disposable incomes of travelers. In the long term, do you have a contingency plan?
In the long term, we need to consider actually how long US could go on those tariff lines. By considering tourism, emerging market is India. We have designed a campaign now. We will start that very soon, targeting the top market of India to attract. We are actually planning not to continue mainly focusing only on numbers. We are focusing more on the revenue per tourist. So 3 to 4 million tourists could be fine as long as we could enhance the revenue from a tourist. There will be an impact over the disposable income of individuals, followed by these tariff imposements. But in the top market categories, that still would be fine for their travel decisions, and we gradually are looking at while improving and developing the tourism product of the country to reach up to the up markets.
The Asian Development Bank expects that Sri Lanka's inflation will accelerate to 3.1% in 2025 and 4.5% in 2026. The ADB cautioned that although Sri Lanka's growth recovery exceeded expectations in 2024, rebounding by 5%, it continues to remain fragile and anticipated that the country will grow at a moderate pace. While highlighting that South Asia will emerge as the fastest growing sub-region in developing Asia, the ADB projected South Asia's growth to accelerate to over 6% in 2025 and 2026, primarily driven by the growth of India.
In 2024, Sri Lanka's recovery exceeded expectations after the deepest economic downturn experienced. The road to recovery was challenging, but much-needed reforms are yielding positive outcomes. The severe contraction of GDP by a cumulative 9.6% in the past 2 years, or 2022 and 2023, turned into a remarkable growth of 5% in 2024. We believe the foundation for sustained economic growth has been built. Despite these achievements, the recovery remains fragile. Going forward, ADB has pipelined a similar volume in budget support for 2025 in line with the IMF program to continue supporting the government's ambitious reforms.
We are expecting that South Asia will be one of the fastest growing sub-regions in developing Asia, and notably India will be supported by strong domestic demand. In Sri Lanka, we expect recovery to continue, but it remains fragile. Full implementation of the most recent US tariffs would negatively affect our growth forecast. There may be also additional shifts in US policy, both trade and non-trade. On Sri Lanka's side, inflation decelerated significantly in 2024, but that was largely due to major cuts in energy prices.
South Asia's growth is expected to accelerate from 5.8% last year to 6% in 2025 and 6.2% in 2026. This is because India's growth is what is driving this through a recovery in public investment, monetary policy easing, and strong domestic demand. When touching on Sri Lanka's growth trajectory, we expect it to grow on a more moderate pace. It is expected to continue its recovery as it will benefit from government-funded construction of bridges, roads, and highways. However, this too will be at a slower pace compared to the previous year. Services growth is expected to be driven by tourism mainly. Moving on to inflation. Inflation in developing Asia is projected to moderate further to 2.3% in 2025 and 2.2% in 2026. Regional inflation will also be pulled down by the People's Republic of China, where inflation will only rise slightly there, but will remain low even though government policies will be in place to incentivize spending. Coming into Sri Lanka's case, we expect inflation to accelerate to 3.1 in 2025 and 4.5 in 2026. Although inflation has been negative for the first 3 months of this year, we expect it to return to positive levels in the near future.
President Anura Dissanayake today launched the National Anti-Corruption Action Plan 2025-29. Addressing the launch event, the head of state vowed to eliminate Sri Lanka's institutional framework centered around bribery and corruption. Sri Lanka's National Anti-Corruption Plan 2025-2029 was launched earlier today in Colombo under the theme Towards a Country of Integrity. The action plan was presented to President Anura Dissanayake by the chairman of the Commission to investigate allegations of bribery or corruption, former Court of Appeal Justice Neil Iddawala.
Corruption reduces the overall quality of public services. The United Nations estimates that corruption costs developing nations over $1.3 trillion annually. According to Sri Lanka's first National Taxpayers Perception Survey last year, 84% of respondents said that corruption directly impacts their willingness to pay taxes. The survey conducted before the action plan revealed that 49% of respondents acknowledged having personally given a bribe. As a society, we must strengthen trust between the state and its people through greater integrity, transparency, and accountability.
For Sri Lanka to attract foreign investment and achieve long-term growth, elimination of corruption is indispensable. I am saying this today as Japan and Japanese companies have been victims of corruption in Sri Lanka in the past. A corruption-free and transparent environment is a prerequisite for investment. Today's launch of the National Action Plan is an important step forward. However, having a plan is only the beginning. Its effective implementation and continuous follow-up are essential to the success of our endeavor. I would like to see all the relevant entities, authorities, all the politicians and government officials work to translate this plan into concrete action and ensure accountability at all levels of governance.
Bribery and corruption, which began from small development projects, have now grown to such an extent that vaccines are being replaced with water due to corruption. Corruption has spread from the local authority level all the way up to the central bank. What use are we if we do not eliminate corruption? An unofficial institution has been established to protect bribery and corruption. This institution comprises the political authority, some officials of the administrative service, and some police officers. Then there are business owners. Alongside legitimate businesses, there are illicit ones. Whether we like it or not, people are suspicious of the judiciary. Regardless of how it may present itself, we will eliminate the institutional framework centered around bribery and corruption. It has been 6 months since we took office. During that time, we observed the situation and gave those concerned time to change. If they are not willing to change, we will replace them after May. A meeting between President Anura Dissanayake and senior officials of Sri Lankan Airlines was held last afternoon at the Presidential Secretariat. The discussions mainly focused on proposals to transform Sri Lankan Airlines into a more profitable state-owned enterprise. Special attention was given to possible solutions for the airline's debt management and exploring new investment opportunities. The President's office affirmed that Sri Lankan Airlines will continue to operate as the national carrier while introducing a new management structure to ensure profitability. In the meantime, a meeting regarding the development plans to be implemented in Sri Lanka under the Colombo Metropolitan Region, Eastern Development Plan and the Greater Hambantota Project was held yesterday at the Presidential Secretariat between Secretary to the President Dr. Nandika Sanatkumar Nayaka and the relevant ministry officials. Officials from Singapore-based urban planning and infrastructure consultancy Surbana Jurong, who will be collaborating on the projects, also joined the discussion virtually. Progress reports on the plans for the projects were reviewed in detail and the Secretary to the President instructed officials to identify any deficiencies and finalize the necessary actions within the next 2 weeks. The discussion also addressed delays in securing necessary approvals for investment under the existing regulatory framework, as well as the urgent need to revise certain legislative instruments to better facilitate national development.
Fast-track your career from O-levels with eSoft.
ඩයිබටිසෝල් සීනිවලින් පරිස්සම් වන ඔබට අමතක නොවන පෝෂණය.
කැලනි වයර් කිසිගින්නක් නෑ.
කිසිගින්නක් නෑ. කැලනි ෆයර් ෂීල්ඩ් වයර්.
Now in Parliament today, opposition leader Sajith Premadasa urged government to send a Sri Lankan delegation to the United States to negotiate the newly imposed tariffs, particularly given that the US Senate and House of Representatives are attempting to limit President Trump's powers with regard to reciprocal tariffs. Meanwhile, opposition legislators accused government of leaving Sri Lanka's economy vulnerable to the tariffs due to their actions during their time in the opposition.
Does the US Senate have a congressional caucus on Sri Lanka or a parliamentary friendship association with Sri Lanka? Has the government taken any action to meet with the representatives of these associations in order to address the ongoing issues surrounding the reciprocal tariffs that the US government has imposed on Sri Lanka?
So in order to address these questions in a formal manner, we require more time. So in days to come, we will be able to answer these questions formally. Thank you.
Senators of both the Republican and Democratic parties are currently working to pass a new law that would limit President Trump's authority to unilaterally impose retaliatory tariffs. In order to discuss this matter with those senators and the House of Representatives, I request that our administration send a delegation. With Sri Lankan exports being slapped with a 44% tariff by the US government, we will face several severe challenges. Sri Lanka generates a significant revenue from the country's logistics sector. When international trade declines, poor logistics performance become apparent. The Trump's administration's reciprocal tariffs have a direct and indirect impact on the nation's maritime industry, which generates a significant amount of revenue from port transmissions. This implies that Sri Lanka is hit with much more than the 44% reciprocal tariffs. The incumbent government is fortunate that our political camps do not protest against such matters and shut down factories. Neither do we initiate protests with the help of trade unions and turn them into conflicts that provoke social retaliation. The government is fortunate that we don't engage in that sort of political culture. Don't underestimate our strength. We will reveal our actual capabilities when the time is right. The time has come for this government to demonstrate their true capabilities. The government must prove to the people that they are able to protect the country's economy despite the US tariffs imposed. We will help the government with that. This is a high time for you to stop whining and start working. When speaking of the economy, we cannot forget the fact Sri Lanka failed to strike a number of trade agreements and even failed to alter our export composition during the past. Subsequently, this led Sri Lanka into a crisis. I am astonished to hear this narrative. They are the ones who objected the free trade agreement between Sri Lanka and Singapore, which was expected to come into effect this year. As the chairman of the Committee of Public Finance, I refuted this, claiming that the country was moving in the wrong direction. However, they insisted that this is the policy of the government. What are these people saying now? Who objected to the free trade agreement between Sri Lanka and Singapore? Was that you or us? Who raised their objections against other similar deals such as the CEPA, ETCA and the MCC? Don't try to deceive the public now. What's happening at the moment? Once the US tariffs come into power, it poses a negative impact to all countries across the globe. This further declines our export potential. Subsequently, we won't be able to achieve the growth expected for the country. This would also result in the inability to generate employment opportunities, the shutdown of factories, which will ultimately cause further uncertainties. I received a news alert saying that the president is planning to convene an all-party conference to discuss on the matter. I don't know if this is accurate, as we didn't receive any information yet. However, we are ready to support the government by holding discussions. However, we could have avoided this situation if we were able to enter into a free trade agreement with the US. However, these people did not let us proceed with that task. This country collapsed because they did not let the previous regimes proceed with the required economic reforms.
Former State Minister Sivanesathurai Chandrakanthan alias Pillayan was arrested by the Criminal Investigation Department last evening in connection with the disappearance of the Vice-Chancellor of the Eastern University of Sri Lanka in 2006. He is reportedly being questioned by the CID under detention orders. And with that, he has more on this and other similar developments. Professor Sivasubramaniam Ravindranath, who was the Vice-Chancellor of the Eastern University of Sri Lanka between 2004 and 2006, disappeared on the 15th of December 2006. Initial investigations by the Criminal Investigation Department revealed that the professor had been abducted. 18 years after the abduction, former State Minister Sivanesathurai Chandrakanthan alias Pillayan was apprehended yesterday at his party office in Batticaloa in connection with the disappearance. He is reportedly being questioned by the CID under detention orders. Pillayan, who was a member of the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam since 1990, broke away from the organisation in 2004. In a separate development, the Mahara Magistrates Court today issued open warrants to apprehend former State Minister Prasanna Ranavira and former Kalaniya Pradesh Sabha member Milroy Pereira. The order was issued after the Criminal Investigation Department informed the court that the suspects were evading arrest in relation to the legal matter pertaining to the alleged sale of state-owned land in Kiribatgoda to a private party using forged documents. Additionally, the court ordered former Minister Mervyn Silva and 3 other defendants in the case to be remanded until the 21st of April. In the meantime, former Health Minister Keheliya Rambukwala arrived at the Criminal Investigation Department today to record a statement in relation to the importation of substandard human immunoglobulin. Meanwhile, a police constable of the State Intelligence Service was arrested by the CID today for allegedly misleading investigations into the Easter Sunday attacks. The constable was accused of misleading investigations into an incident where 2 police officers had been killed in Vaunathu by associates of Saharan Hashim. Welcome back. Now in your stock update, the Colombo Stock Exchange closed in red today as a result of price losses in capital goods and banking counters. The all share price index closed 1.66% lower at 14,875.95 points, while the S&P SL20 decreased by 2.37% to close at 4,352.69 points. Market turnover was 3.1 billion rupees. The highest contributors to the ASPI were Haley's, Sampath Bank and John Keel's Holdings. The capital goods sector was the top contributor to market turnover, followed by the banking sector as the second highest contributor. Foreign investors closed as net buyers, purchasing shares worth 1.1 billion rupees, while domestic investors closed as net sellers, offloading shares worth 2.9 billion rupees. And up next, we have Minal Vikramage from Capital Alliance with some thoughts on the current status of the economy in our next segment, Economic Outlook.
In domestic financial markets, the weekly average weighted prime lending rate increased by 10 basis points to 8.53%, while the average weighted call money rate edged down slightly to 7.94%. Reserve money expanded, primarily due to an increase in currency in circulation, and market liquidity continued to show surplus, reaching 191.21 billion LKR by 4th April 2025, compared to 184.26 billion LKR in the previous week. Yields for treasury bills experienced a marginal increase, which is mirrored in the secondary market, with the exception of treasury bonds with maturities over 15 years. In the foreign exchange market, the Sri Lankan rupee depreciated by 1.58% against the dollar during the year up to 4th April. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka recorded net foreign exchange purchases amounting to $401.9 million in March 2025.
That's all the time we have on First at Night tonight. Thank you for joining. Have a great night.